Daniel Marsh had seen many strange things in his 52 years of life, but nothing prepared him for the Galactic Archive on Prime. The space station floated like a silver moon in the darkness between stars. Inside its walls, scholars from dozens of alien species had gathered for centuries to study one mystery that none of them could solve. They had vanished 3 million years ago. They left behind ruins scattered across 1,000 worlds. They left behind machines that still worked but no one could understand. Most importantly, they left behind their language carved into stone and metal and crystal. And for 300 centuries, the greatest minds in the galaxy had tried to read that language. All of them had failed. Daniel walked through the archive's main hall with a slight limp in his left leg, an old injury from a war most people had already forgotten. He wore simple civilian clothes now, not the uniform he had worn for 30 years. The U.S. Army had been his home once. Cryptanalysis had been his work, breaking codes and finding patterns in the noise of enemy communications. That life was behind him now. He was just a security consultant attached to a minor diplomatic mission. Nothing more. Ambassador Eth towered over him as she led the human delegation through the hall. She was an species with 4 arms and eyes that glittered like black diamonds. Her people had built this archive 4,000 years ago. They considered themselves the keepers of galactic knowledge. They did not hide their opinion of humans. Primitive newcomers. That was what they called humanity. The human species had only joined the galactic conquered 50 years ago. In the eyes of civilizations that measured their history in hundreds of thousands of years, humans were children who had just learned to walk. Daniel did not mind. He had learned long ago that being underestimated was sometimes an advantage. The walls of the archive were covered with inscriptions, symbols that curved and twisted like frozen waves. Daniel found himself staring at them as he walked. Something about their shape felt familiar. He could not say why. Scholar OK noticed his interest. She was young for a, which meant she was only about 200 years old. Her eyes were softer than the ambassador's, curious rather than cold. "The inscriptions fascinate you," she said. It was not a question. Daniel nodded slowly. "I've never seen anything like them, but at the same time they remind me of something." Many visitors say that. The symbols have a quality that speaks to the mind, but their meaning remains hidden. We have over 8 million inscriptions. We have built thinking machines to analyze them. We have compared them to every known language in the galaxy. Nothing works. What do you think they were trying to say? OK tilted her head. It was strange to see her face show surprise. No one has ever asked me that question before. Why not? Because the focus has always been on what the symbols mean, not on what they wanted to communicate. Those are 2 different things. Daniel looked at the inscription nearest to him, a spiral of symbols carved into a panel of dark metal. The scholars had probably scanned it 1,000 times, measured every angle and curve, fed the data into their machines and waited for answers that never came. But Daniel was not looking at the individual symbols. He was looking at the pattern they formed together, the way they clustered and scattered, the rhythm of the spacing between them. He had seen this before, not these exact symbols, but this kind of structure. During his years in military intelligence, he had encountered enemy codes that used a similar technique. They hid meaningful data within patterns that looked decorative or random, 2 layers of information, one visible, one hidden beneath. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said. "It might sound naive." Ambassador Eth had stopped walking. She was watching him now with those diamond eyes, waiting for him to embarrass himself. "Of course," OK said. Daniel pointed at the spiral inscription. "Have your scholars ever considered that you might be reading only half the message?" The silence that followed was heavy. OK's eyes widened. Ambassador Eth made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Half the message," the ambassador repeated. "A human security consultant suggests that 300 centuries of scholarship missed half the message. Tell me, human, what expertise do you possess that our greatest minds lack? Daniel met her gaze without flinching. I spent 30 years reading messages that people wanted to hide. I learned that the best way to protect information is not to encrypt it. It's to make people think they've already found the answer. They stop looking. They miss what's underneath. And you believe the did this. I don't know what the did, but when I look at these symbols, I see two patterns. One is obvious. It's the shape of the symbols themselves. That's what everyone has been studying. But there's another pattern in the spacing, in the clustering, in the way the symbols relate to each other. That pattern is harder to see, but it's there. OK was staring at the inscription now. Her four hands were trembling slightly. That is impossible, Ambassador Eth said. Our analysis would have detected any secondary pattern. Maybe not. Your analysis looked for linguistic structure, grammar and vocabulary and syntax. But what if the second layer isn't linguistic? What if it's something else entirely? Such as? Daniel hesitated. He knew how this would sound. Emotion. The ambassador's laugh was louder this time. Emotion. You suggest that an advanced civilization encoded emotion into their writing system, that we have failed to translate their language because we did not consider their feelings. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just telling you what I see. Ambassador Eth turned away. The human delegation will be shown to their quarters. Scholar OK, please escort them. I have wasted enough time on primitive speculation. She walked away without another word. The other aliens in the hall watched Daniel with expressions he could not read. Some seemed amused. Others seemed offended that a human had dared to question scholarship. But OK had not moved. She was still staring at the inscription. Her black eyes reflected the ancient symbols like mirrors. Emotion, she whispered. We never looked for emotion. Our species does not communicate that way. We assumed they were like us. Maybe they weren't. Maybe they weren't. She turned to face him. Daniel Marsh, I think we should talk more privately, without the ambassador. Daniel nodded. For the first time since arriving on Prime, he felt like he had found something worth pursuing. A puzzle, a pattern, a message that had waited 3 million years for someone to read it properly. He did not know yet what he would find, but he knew he would not stop looking until he understood what they had been trying to say. 1 week passed before OK came to Daniel's quarters. She arrived in the middle of the night cycle when the archive's corridors were empty and quiet. She carried a data tablet under one of her 4 arms and nervousness in her eyes. I should not be doing this, she said as she stepped inside. If Ambassador Eth discovers that I am working with you, my career will be over. Daniel closed the door behind her. Then why are you here? Because I cannot stop thinking about what you said. 2 patterns, one visible and one hidden. I have spent the last 7 days reviewing my research with that idea in mind, and I found something. She placed the tablet on his table and activated the display. A hologram rose into the air showing an inscription that Daniel had not seen before. The symbols spiraled outward from a central point like the arms of a galaxy. This inscription was found on a memorial stone, OK explained. We translated the surface meaning decades ago. It lists names, thousands of names. We assumed it was a record of important individuals, leaders or scholars or warriors. And now I looked at the spacing between the names, the clustering you mentioned. There is a pattern there. When I mapped it mathematically, I found a waveform hidden in the arrangement. Daniel leaned closer. A waveform like a sound. Not exactly, more like a rhythm, a pulse. The names are not arranged randomly or alphabetically. They are arranged in groups that rise and fall, like breathing, or like a heartbeat. The hologram shifted to show the waveform she had discovered. Daniel watched the pattern rise and fall across the display. Something cold moved through his chest. He had felt this sensation before. During the wars, when he decoded messages that revealed terrible truths hidden in plain sight. "What does it mean?" he asked. "I do not know, but I believe you are right. They encoded something beneath their words, something we have been missing for 300 centuries." They worked together through the night. Daniel explained the techniques he had learned during his military service, how enemy forces would hide coordinates inside weather reports, how they would embed orders within routine communications. The key was always the same: make people think they understood the message. Let them find the obvious meaning and stop looking. OK listened with growing excitement. Her species communicated through pure logic, facts and data and precise meanings. The idea that information could be hidden beneath other information was foreign to her, but she was learning quickly. By morning, they had developed a theory. The writing system operated on two levels. The surface level conveyed factual information, names and dates and descriptions, but the arrangement of those facts conveyed something else, something emotional. "We need access to more inscriptions," Daniel said. "The ones in the lower archives, the damaged and incomplete artifacts that no one studies anymore. That will require permission from High Scholar. He oversees all research in the archive." "Will he give it?" Okay's silence was answer enough. High Scholar was an elderly being from the species. His body was crystalline, almost transparent, with light moving through him like thoughts made visible. He had built his entire reputation on his translation methodology, a methodology that Daniel was now challenging. The meeting took place in his private study. Commander Lisa Vance came with Daniel as his official supervisor. She was the head of human diplomatic security, and she was not happy about this situation. "You're stirring up trouble," she told Daniel before they entered. "They are already suspicious of us. If this goes wrong, it could damage human relations with the conquered. And if I'm right, then you'll have embarrassed the most powerful scholars in the galaxy. That's not better." Receive them with cold courtesy. The light inside his crystalline body flickered as he listened to Daniel's request. His voice was like wind chimes, soft and musical but without warmth. "You wish to access the lower archives to pursue a theory that contradicts 300 centuries of established research. A theory developed in 1 week by a human with no formal training in." "That's correct," Daniel said. "On what basis do you believe your theory has merit?" Daniel told him about the waveform that OK had discovered, about the patterns in spacing and clustering, about the possibility that the encoded emotion alongside information. Listened without interruption. When Daniel finished, the light inside the crystal being pulsed slowly. "Emotion," said. "You suggest that a civilization capable of engineering artificial stars hid feelings in their writing like children passing notes. I suggest that they wanted to be understood completely, not just their facts but their feelings. And I suggest that the reason no one has translated their language is because your scholars have been reading with their minds but not their hearts." The light flared bright enough to make Daniel squint. He had angered the High Scholar, but he did not take back his words. "You are granted access to the lower archives," said at last. "Scholar OK will accompany you. You have 30 days to produce evidence supporting your theory. If you fail, I will recommend that all humans be restricted from research areas. Am I clear?" "Perfectly." They found what they needed on the 12th day. A fragment of stone no larger than Daniel's hand. It had been dismissed as debris and stored in a forgotten corner of the lower archives. But when Daniel applied his method, reading both the symbols and their arrangement, something remarkable happened. The symbols on the fragment formed a phrase, just 7 words, but they were the first coherent phrase ever translated in 300 centuries of effort. OK read the translation aloud. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "We remember those who will not return." Daniel stared at the ancient stone in his hands. 3 million years ago, Someone had carved these words. Someone who had lost people they loved. Someone who wanted to make sure those people were not forgotten. "It's a memorial," he whispered, "just like you said, but the surface meaning only gave us the names. The hidden meaning tells us why those names were written." "Grief," OK said. "They were grieving. They encoded their grief into the very structure of their writing. Because they wanted anyone who read it to feel what they felt, not just know what happened, but understand how it felt to live through it." They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of their discovery settling over them like dust. Daniel thought about the soldiers he had served with, the ones who never came home. He understood now why this translation had been hidden from the logical minds of alien scholars. To read the language, you had to know what loss felt like. You had to carry your own grief. And Daniel Marsh carried plenty of that. The Grand Assembly Hall of Prime could hold 10,000 beings. On the day Daniel presented his findings, every seat was filled. Representatives from dozens of species had traveled across the galaxy to witness what the humans claimed to have achieved. Most of them expected to watch a primitive species embarrass itself before the conquered. Daniel stood at the center of the hall with OK beside him. The fragment of stone floated in a display field between them. Around them rose tier after tier of alien faces, some curious, some hostile, some simply waiting to see what would happen. Representative Henley Brooks sat in the human section looking pale and nervous. He was the official ambassador for humanity to the conquered. He had spent the morning begging Daniel to cancel the presentation. "If you're wrong, this will set human relations back 50 years, he had said. "And if I'm right, then you'll have proved that humans can do something the entire galaxy couldn't. That might be even worse." Daniel had ignored him. He was not doing this for politics or diplomacy. He was doing this because a civilization that died 3 million years ago deserved to have their words understood. High Scholar opened the proceedings. His crystalline body glowed softly as he explained the history of studies. 300 centuries of work by the greatest minds in the galaxy. 8 million inscriptions. Countless theories proposed and tested and abandoned. And now, he said with barely concealed disdain, a human security consultant claimed to have found what everyone else had missed. Daniel took the floor. He spoke simply and clearly. He explained how he had noticed the patterns in the inscriptions, how OK had confirmed his suspicions by finding the waveform hidden in the memorial stone, how together they had developed a translation method that read both layers of the language. Then he showed them the fragment. "This stone was dismissed as debris," he said. "It sat in the lower archives for 2,000 years, but when we applied our method, it yielded the first coherent phrase ever translated." He displayed the symbols on the fragment. Then he displayed the translation beside them. "We remember those who will not return." Silence fell over the assembly hall. 10,000 beings stared at those 7 words. "The surface meaning gives us facts," Daniel continued. "Names and dates and locations. That's what your scholars have been reading. But the arrangement of those facts conveys something else. Emotion. Feeling. They didn't just want to record what happened. They wanted anyone who read their words to feel what they felt." A ripple of sound moved through the crowd. Arguments breaking out in dozens of languages. Fleet Admiral X, a reptilian military commander, raised his clawed hand for silence. "You claim the encoded emotion into their writing," he said. His voice was deep and rough like stones grinding together. "How is this possible? Emotion cannot be measured or it cannot be transmitted through symbols." "Yes, it can," Daniel said. "Humans have done it for thousands of years. Music conveys emotion through patterns of sound. Poetry conveys emotion through patterns of words. We don't just communicate facts, we communicate feelings. And we understand each other because we share those feelings." "Are you saying humans understood this language because you are emotional creatures?" I'm saying we understood it because we know what loss feels like. They designed their language to be read by beings who have grieved, who have lost people they loved. Your scholars are brilliant, but they approach language as pure logic. They miss the emotional layer because they weren't looking for it. Admiral X leaned back in his seat. His yellow eyes studied Daniel with new interest. High Scholar rose to speak. The light in his body pulsed with agitation. This is speculation dressed as discovery. A single phrase proves nothing. The human could be projecting his own emotions onto random symbols. We need more evidence before we accept such a radical claim. Then let me prove it, Daniel said. Give me a sealed inscription, something that has never been translated. I will read it using our method. If the result is coherent, you will know the method works. Murmurs spread through the hall. This was a dangerous offer. If Daniel failed before the entire conquered, humanity would be humiliated. There is a sealed vault on the moon of 4, OK said. The ruins there contain a chamber that has never been opened. The door is locked by an inscription that has defeated every attempt to decode it. If you can open that vault, Admiral X said slowly, it would be proof beyond question. High Scholar objected immediately. The vault is sacred to our studies. We cannot allow a primitive to attempt what our greatest scholars have failed. Why not? The voice came from Ambassador Eth. She had been silent throughout the presentation. Now she stood, her 4 arms folded across her chest. If the human fails, we lose nothing. If he succeeds, we gain access to a vault that has been sealed for 3 million years. The risk is his. The reward is ours. Daniel looked at her with surprise. She met his gaze without expression. He understood. She expected him to fail. She wanted him to fail publicly so that humans would know their place. I accept, Daniel said. The vote was swift. The conquered approved the expedition to a 4. Daniel would have 6 weeks to prepare. If he could not open the vault by then, the matter would be closed. After the assembly ended, Admiral X approached Daniel in the corridor. The massive reptilian towered over him, scales gleaming like dark bronze. I have fought many battles, the Admiral said. I have seen warriors from 100 species. I learned long ago not to judge strength by appearance. Is that a compliment? It is an observation. Your people have been part of the conquered for only 50 years. In that time, I have watched you carefully. You are small and fragile, and your lives are terribly short. But there is something in your eyes that I recognize. What's that? The look of someone who has lost much, who carries their dead with them wherever they go. The Admiral's yellow eyes narrowed. Your species knows grief. It shapes everything you do. Perhaps that is why you can read what we cannot. He walked away without waiting for a response. Daniel watched him go, thinking about the soldiers he had served with, the friends who never came home, the faces that still appeared in his dreams. Admiral X was right. Humans knew grief. They carried it in their bones. And somehow, across 3 million years of silence, they had known that someone like Daniel would come. Someone who could read their words because he had written the same message in his own heart. We remember those who will not return. Daniel whispered the phrase to himself as he walked back to his quarters. He was beginning to understand what he would find in the vault on a 4, not weapons or technology or treasure. A memorial, and a message from one grieving heart to another. A 4 was a dead moon orbiting a dying star. The light that reached its surface was cold and red, painting everything in shades of rust and shadow. The ruins covered the moon like the bones of a giant creature half buried in dust. Daniel stood before the sealed vault with OK at his side. Behind them waited a joint expedition of humans and aliens, scholars and soldiers and diplomats who had traveled across the galaxy to witness this moment. 6 weeks of preparation had led to this single door. The vault entrance was carved from black stone that seemed to drink the dim light. Symbols covered its surface in spiraling patterns that made Daniel's eyes ache when he looked at them too long. At the center was a circular depression, the lock that had defeated every attempt to open it for 3 million years. Specialist Karen Holt stood nearby with her translation equipment. She was young, barely 30, a linguist assigned to support Daniel's work. She had spent the journey studying everything he had taught her about the two-layer method. "The inscription around the lock is different from anything she said. "The symbols are more complex, more densely packed." "That's because it's not just a lock," Daniel replied. "It's a test. They wanted to make sure that whoever opened this vault truly understood their language, not just the words but the meaning beneath them." He approached the door slowly. The symbols seemed to shift as he moved, though he knew that was just a trick of the strange light. He placed his hand on the cold stone and felt something move through him, not a physical sensation, something deeper, like a memory that belonged to someone else. They had built their language to carry emotion across time. Standing here, touching their words, Daniel could feel the echo of what they had felt when they sealed this vault. Grief, heavy and dark and endless, but something else too. Hope, a desperate hope that someday someone would come who could understand. "Can you read it?" OK asked. "I can feel it, but reading it is different." He traced the symbols with his fingers. "The surface meaning is a question, who comes to this place, but the emotional layer is asking something else." "What?" Daniel closed his eyes. The patterns moved through his mind like waves in deep water. He had spent 30 years learning to find meaning in noise, finding patterns that others missed. But this was different. This required him to open parts of himself that he had kept locked away for decades. The soldiers he had lost, the friends who died in his arms, the guilt he carried for surviving when they did not. He had buried all of that beneath layers of discipline and duty. Now they were asking him to dig it up again. "The question isn't who comes to this place," he said quietly. "It's who remains when everyone else is gone." Karen stepped closer. "Daniel, are you okay?" He wasn't. The weight of the vault's question pressed down on him like a physical force. They had lost everything. Their entire civilization. Everyone they loved. They had built this vault to preserve the memory of what they lost. And they had sealed it with a lock that could only be opened by someone who understood that kind of loss. "I can't do this," Daniel whispered. "What do you mean?" "The lock requires me to speak the answer, but the answer isn't words. It's feeling. I have to feel what they felt. I have to open up everything I've spent 30 years trying to forget." Karen put her hand on his arm. "Then maybe that's why you're here. Not because you're a code breaker, because you're someone who knows what it means to lose people. You don't understand. I've spent my whole life running from that pain. If I let it in now, I don't know if I can control it." "Maybe you're not supposed to control it. Maybe you're supposed to let it speak." Daniel looked at her young face. She had never seen war, never held a dying friend. She didn't know what she was asking, but she was right. They hadn't sealed this vault to keep people out. They had sealed it to find the right person, someone who could carry their grief because they already carried their own. He turned back to the door. The symbols waited, patient, eternal. Daniel closed his eyes and stopped fighting. He let the memories come. The faces of the dead, the sound of their voices, the weight of knowing that he lived while they did not, the guilt that never faded no matter how many years passed. And beneath all of that, the love. The fierce love he had felt for the soldiers beside him. The bonds forged in fire and blood. The reason their loss still hurt after all this time. They had felt the same thing. 3 million years ago, they had loved their people. They had lost them. And they had built this vault to make sure that loss was remembered. Daniel opened his mouth and spoke. The words came in the language, sounds he had never made before. But the emotion was his own. Grief and love and hope woven together into a single phrase. "We remain so that they are not forgotten. We carry them in our hearts until the last star dies." The vault door trembled. The symbols on its surface began to glow with soft blue light. A sound rose from somewhere deep within the stone, not mechanical, almost like a sigh, like someone who had been holding their breath for 3 million years finally releasing it. The door opened. Inside was darkness at first. Then lights flickered to life, ancient crystals that still held power after all this time. The chamber beyond was vast, its walls covered with inscriptions that seemed to go on forever, and at the center stood a figure. It was a machine, humanoid in shape but clearly artificial. Its body was made of the same black stone as the vault. Its eyes were empty sockets that suddenly filled with pale light as Daniel stepped inside. Guardian, OK whispered. The legends were true, the left a keeper for their memories. The Guardian moved, slow and deliberate, joints grinding after 3 million years of stillness. It turned to face Daniel. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through hollow spaces. You carry grief. You spoke with a heart that remembers. You are the one we waited for. The Guardian bowed. A machine older than any living civilization lowering itself before a human who had simply learned how to mourn. Behind Daniel, OK made a sound he had never heard from her before. He turned to see tears running from her black eyes. The first time any alien had shown such emotion before humans. The walls, she said. Daniel, look at the walls. He looked. The inscriptions covered every surface, thousands upon thousands of names, and beside each name an image preserved in crystal, faces, millions of faces, that had saved the memory of everyone they lost. This wasn't a vault of treasure or technology. It was a monument to love. And they had sealed it so tightly that only someone who understood that love could open it. 3 months had passed since the vault opened. The galaxy had not been the same since. The memorial records were being translated and shared across every world in the conquered. For the first time in 300 centuries, the ancient civilization was no longer a mystery to be solved. They were people to be mourned. Their faces filled screens on 1,000 planets. Their names were spoken aloud by beings who had never known them but who now understood what they had lost. Daniel stood in the grand assembly hall where he had once been mocked as a primitive. Today the hall was quiet. Only a few dozen beings had gathered for this private ceremony. High Scholar stepped forward. The light in his crystalline body was soft now, humble in a way Daniel had never seen before. I spent 400 years studying said. I built theories and methodologies. I believed I understood their civilization, but I was reading their words without hearing their voice. Daniel Marsh taught me that intelligence without feeling is incomplete. I offer my apologies and my gratitude. Daniel nodded in acceptance. He held no anger toward. The scholar had simply done what his nature allowed. Some beings were built for logic, others were built for feeling. Neither was wrong. They were just different. Ambassador Eth spoke next. Her diamond eyes held none of the coldness Daniel remembered from their first meeting. They have long considered ourselves the keepers of galactic knowledge. We looked down on younger species because we believed our age granted us wisdom. But wisdom is not measured in centuries. It is measured in understanding, and the humans have understood what we could not. She turned to face the assembled representatives. I propose that humanity be elevated to full partnership status in the galactic conquered, not as junior members to be tolerated, as equals to be respected. This is long overdue. The vote was unanimous. After the ceremony, Daniel found himself alone in the archive's memorial wing. The faces looked down at him from the crystalline displays that had been installed here. Millions of them, each one someone who had been loved, someone who was now remembered. OK found him there. You have been offered the position of head scholar for studies, she said. I thought you would be celebrating. I haven't accepted yet. Why not? Daniel was silent for a long moment. The faces of the dead surrounded him, But he was seeing other faces now, human faces, the soldiers who had served beside him, the friends who never came home. When I opened that vault, I had to let my grief speak. I had to stop running from the pain I've carried for 30 years, and now I don't know how to put it back. Okay, moved closer. Perhaps you are not supposed to put it back. What do you mean? They did not design their language to hide grief. They designed it to share grief, to make sure that no one who mourned would ever mourn alone. You opened the vault because you carry your dead with you. That is not weakness. It is the very thing that made you capable of understanding. I've spent my whole life thinking that my grief was a burden, something to be controlled, hidden, overcome. On my world, we do not grieve. When someone dies, we record their achievements and move forward. We consider emotion to be inefficient. But watching you open that vault taught me something. She paused. Grief is not inefficient. It is the price of love. And a species that loves deeply enough to grieve deeply is a species worth knowing. Daniel looked at her. This alien being with her 4 arms and black eyes and logical mind. She had learned to see value in human emotion. Perhaps he could learn to see it too. I lost people, he said quietly. Good soldiers, friends. I survived and they didn't. For 30 years I've asked myself why. What made me special enough to live when they died? And now I think maybe I wasn't supposed to live because I was special. I was supposed to live because someone needed to remember them. Someone needed to carry their memory forward. He gestured at the faces surrounding them, just like they did. He took a deep breath. The weight in his chest felt different now. Not lighter, but more purposeful. His grief had given him the ability to read a dead language. It had opened a vault that had been sealed for 3 million years. It had changed how the galaxy understood emotion itself. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was why he had survived. I'll accept the position, he said. 1 month later, Daniel stood before his first class. A room full of alien scholars who had come to learn the 2-layer method, to learn how to read not just words but feelings. They built their language to carry emotion across time, he told them. They wanted anyone who read their words to feel what they felt. But this only works if you are willing to feel, to open yourself to grief and joy and love and loss. To understand any language, you must first understand what it means to care about something deeply enough to mourn when it is gone. He activated the display behind him. A single phrase appeared on the screen, the last inscription they had translated from the vault, the final message they had left for whoever came after them. Karen Holt read the translation aloud. Her voice filled the room with words that had waited 3 million years to be spoken. We speak so that those who grieve will know they are not alone. The scholars were silent. Some of them had lived for thousands of years. Some had traveled across galaxies. But in that moment, they all understood the same simple truth. They had not left behind their language to preserve knowledge. They had left it to preserve connection, to reach across the void of time and death and say to anyone who was suffering what grieving hearts have always needed to hear. You are not alone. Someone else felt this too, and they remembered. Daniel Marsh looked at the alien faces before him and thought about the soldiers he had lost, the friends whose names he still whispered in the dark, the grief he had carried for 30 years. It had not been a burden after all. It had been a gift. And now he would use it to teach a galaxy how to understand what it meant to be human, to love, to lose, and to remember. Because that was what humans did. They carried their dead with them. They spoke their names into the silence. They refused to let go. And in the end, that refusal to forget was what made them capable of hearing voices that had been silent for 3 million years. They had known someone would come, someone who understood grief, someone who could read their language because they had written the same words in their own heart. They had been waiting for a human. They just hadn't known it yet.